Hey runners, this is Naya Calmels from Mindful Movement, and today I'll be showing you post-run stretches to help you stay healthy and so that you can stay on the trails for as long as you want. Today our video is going to be roughly 30 minutes or so, but once you get these exercises down, it's only going to take you about 10 or 15 minutes to do them after you're done with your run, and it's well worth it so you can stay out there on the trails. Come join me for our stretches. Okay, so we're lying in supine position, just means lying on your back, knees bent, soles of the feet on the floor. I'm going to go through our anchor points in this position. So do this with me. You're going to think about allowing the back of the head to rest heavily into the floor. Shoulder blades are wide across the back of the rib cage, and especially for women who have that boobs out, butt back posture, you're going to really have to work on getting the rib cage down. If you're hyperlordotic, meaning you have a lot of sway in your lower back like me, it's going to take a little bit more effort to draw softness into the rib cage and draw the back of the rib cage down into the floor. And that's going to be something you're going to want to focus on throughout the pelvic tilts we're about to do. So take both hands, place the heel of your hands on the front of the bony landmarks of the pelvis. This is known as the ASIS. And fingertips are going to go on the pubic bone. And generally, if your hands are relatively flat, your pelvis is in what we call neutral position. So we want to start with pelvis in neutral, and I will often refer to neutral spine, neutral pelvis, which means your spine is lengthened and in a neutral position. Pelvis is such that when you place your palms on the front of it, they're relatively flat. Soles of the feet are about sits bone distance apart. Knees are in line with the second toe, and just for reference, your sits bones are the bones that you sit upon at the base of the pelvis. So now that we're in supine position, let's start with our pelvic tilts. We'll start with north-south. So if you imagine that there's a compass overlaid on top of me, my head is north, my feet are south, and then I've got east-west, and you can also think of that as right to left. On the next inhale, think about breathing the back of the rib cage into the floor, and on your exhale, we're going to co-contract, and we'll go through this for a couple breath cycles. So when I say co-contract, what I mean is you're lifting the pelvic floor, you're drawing lower abs towards the spine, and you're engaging the spinal extensor muscles along the spine. So co-contraction is a short way of saying the coordinated contraction of those three muscle groups. Transverse abdominis, the lower abs, pelvic floor lifting, like you're trying to cut off urination midstream, and the multifidi muscles, which are those small stabilizer muscles along the spine. All right, lots of terms here. So now that we know what the co-contraction is, think of that as the ignition for your car. You have to start your co-contraction before you can start the movement, like the car actually going anywhere. So start your engine on your next exhale, co-contract, and then with that cylinder support around your midsection, you're going to curl the pubic bone towards the belly button in a northern tilt. And then you're going to take your pelvis into a southern tilt, drawing pubic bone towards your heels. I'm going to put my arms up here just so you can see what's happening in my pelvis more. And you'll notice I really have to work to keep my rib cage down, so I hope that you're doing the same thing with me. On your next exhale, co-contract, curl the pelvis north. I'm thinking about imprinting the lower spine into the mat. And on my exhale, I'm going south. I'm still trying to keep the rib cage rooted. You will see more of an arc in my lower spine. Continuing here for a few more breaths, and then we'll go into east-west, also known as right-left. One more breath going north, and generally I use the exhale on the northern tilt and inhale on the southern tilt. But I always tell people that they should follow the breath pattern that best supports the movement in their body. All right, so bony landmarks at the front of the pelvis. You're going to imagine that you have a teeter-totter across the top of the pelvis, and there's more weight on your right side. So from here, let's get an angle from above so you can see what's happening. Imagine that teeter-totter here. Right side is going to dip down to the mat or the floor. I'm not using a mat at the moment. And then drop back to center. And then left side is going to dip down towards the floor and come back to center. So if you imagine there were two weighted balls or two children on a teeter-totter, the teeter-totter moves back and forth. The fulcrum point is right at the center of the pelvis. And you're actually thinking about moving from the center. And you'll notice that I have to work to keep my knees stable. So the movement is isolated to the pelvis. You'll also feel the lumbar spine rotating with the pelvis, but you want to keep the upper body quiet and knees, feet as quiet as possible and as relaxed as possible. One more time to each side, going to the right, dipping down. You're rotating the pelvis to the right and then rotating the pelvis to the left. And then we'll come back to center. We're going to go into pelvic circles. So we're connecting those four directions. I like to think at this point of a clock face lying on top of my pelvic bowl. So 12 o'clock is where north is, 6 o'clock is where south is. You can fill in the rest. On your next exhale, you'll co-contract, curl the pelvis north to 12 o'clock. That means you're imprinting the lower spine. Let's get an angle from this side view. You're imprinting the spine as much as you can to curl the pelvis as much as you can to get to that 12 o'clock place. And then you're circling around. And as you circle around, you want to try to hit every imaginary number along the face of that imaginary clock. Now, when I said a clock on the front of the pelvic bowl, I put my hands like this and it made it seem like it was a really large clock. I'm coming back to center and then we'll go the other direction. Your clock might be like wristwatch size. It might be really small. So I'm going to do my next circle much smaller. So I'm going to go towards the north. And then I'm imagining a dime right underneath my sacrum and I'm circling around the dime. So I don't even know if it's going to come out in the video. It might look like I'm not even moving. But I actually can feel in my body that it is more challenging for me to do a smaller circle than the larger circle I started with. And I'll come back to center. I'll do one more time in each direction. I'll make my circles a little bigger, really more for the benefit of the video than the benefit of the exercise. So please keep your circles small because we're trying to work all these small stabilizing muscles that don't get as much attention as the large mover muscles like we use when we're doing things like running. So on our next exhale, we're going to co-contract, curl north. I'm making this big, so I'm really, really tucking the pelvis as much as I can. And then I'm going around in my circle and I'm thinking about hitting each number along the way, making my circle slow, smooth, and as fluid as possible. When I get all the way back up to 12 o'clock, I really have to make it all the way back there before I come back to center and relax. Last time, last direction. And again, I'll make this one small just so you can see what it really looks like when I do this in my own practice versus for a video. And it's important that you see this so that you understand that a lot of these movements are really subtle, but they actually have huge impact when you do them regularly. And I just finished my circle. I'm coming back to neutral pelvis again. So often when I watch people do this, it looks kind of like this. See how the legs are following? And if you look at the rib cage, if I'm really sloppy about it, my whole upper body will follow too. So the idea here is to isolate the pelvis. Keep that in mind when we go on to sits bone reaches. So our sits bones are the base of the pelvis, the bones that we sit upon. And we're going to think about drawing a line from the right sits bone towards the back of the right heel. We're going to stay long through the side body, and we're going to take the right sits bone towards the back of the right heel, lengthening the space between the lower base of the rib cage and the top of the pelvis. And then we'll switch to the other side, lengthening the left sits bone towards the back of the left heel. And just like with all these other pelvic tilts that we did, we're maintaining as much quiet and stability in the lower and upper body, just moving the pelvis. This is considered to be a stretch for the quadratus lumborum, or the QL, which is known as the hip hiker muscle. So as you stretch long in the side body on one side, the other side does hike up, but that's not where your focus is. Your focus is on the lengthening. We'll do one more time to each side and continue to soften through the rib cage. Let the toes go wide on your floor or your mat. And then we'll come back to center and we're ready to move on to the next exercises. Here I am lying on a yoga block underneath my pelvis. If you have a yoga block, put it there now. If you don't have a yoga block, grab a pillow or something that will elevate your pelvis. The purpose of it being there is to lengthen through the spine. So I'm giving you my faves as far as stretches that I do after I run. Know that there are tons of different stretches you could be doing, lots of exercises to help stabilize different muscles and strengthen muscles to keep balance in the body. We're not going to cover that today. I just want to give you the most important stretches, in my opinion, for after your runs so that you can keep running healthfully and hopefully forever. Draw your right knee in towards your chest. Again, this is underneath your pelvis. Make sure it's not underneath your lower back. As you draw your knee in towards your chest, think about staying long through the side body and allow yourself to curl your pelvis north, just like when we were practicing those pelvic tilts earlier. It's part of why we did them. You're going to reach the opposite leg long, reaching through the heel, flexing the foot. Keep the heel grounded down. So if you can't straighten the leg all the way, that's not an issue, but your heel does need to make contact with the ground. And you're going to continue to reach through that heel as you curl the pelvis north. Make sure this hip doesn't start to hike up on you. There are lots of ways our body likes to compensate to be successful, and we're not actually successfully stretching the areas that we want. So keep long through here. I'm going to switch to the other leg. You can switch as well, but I really want you to see what we're stretching. So the leg that is extended is the hip that we're stretching. Our hip flexors are what's stretching here. They are responsible for drawing our knee up, like when we're walking upstairs or running up a hill. So it's important to get length in them after we've been doing things like running. The more you curl the pelvis north and reach through that heel, the more stretch you're going to get through the front of the hip here. All right, that's number one. Number two, if you have a yoga strap or the belt of a robe or a belt at all, this is what you're going to use here. Keep your upper body as relaxed as you can. We're stretching the back of the hamstrings. So hip flexors and hamstrings are antagonist muscles. We want to make sure we stretch both of them because they both work when we run. Long spine, shoulders drawn wide across the back of the rib cage, elbows staying rooted to the floor. Flex the foot so that the toes are curled back towards the shin. Reach through the heel so you're extending the leg up towards the ceiling without letting that hip hike up again. That's going to be a theme here. And then a few different ways to stretch the hamstrings. If you want to make it more dynamic, draw the knee in towards the chest on the inhale, reach through the heel on the exhale. And so you'll continue to move, bending and extending at the knee. Your opposite leg can either be bent or you can have the leg straight on the floor. If you have the leg straight on the floor, make sure you're reaching through that heel. Also make sure that you're keeping the pelvis in a neutral position and stable as you move the leg. So if having your legs straight means that you start to flare the rib cage up and send the pelvis south, then you probably want to draw the knee back into a bent leg position, sole the foot on the floor, to allow yourself to come back into neutral spine, neutral pelvis. Getting back to that right leg, we're now going to externally rotate and internally rotate from the top of the leg. So take a look here. Even though the foot's moving, the motion is happening, internal rotation and external rotation. Now the hip joint is the cup of the pelvis and the head of the leg. Imagine the head of the leg in the cup of the pelvis rotating back and forth. That's the motion you want. You'll look at my foot, see my foot is moving, but it's moving because of the motion of the top of the leg. I'm not just moving the ankle. Okay? All right, so from here, let's go back to external rotation. So externally rotating from the top of the leg, which is going to mean that the toes start facing away from us. Take your left arm out into a T position. Keep your pelvis stable, imagining that there are two headlights, one on each of these bony landmarks at the front of the pelvis, shining up towards the sky. Don't let those headlights veer off course. They want to shine in a straight line up towards the sky as you draw the leg open away from midline. Your left hand or left arm is working as a counterbalance, and you're using your right arm to give yourself a little bit of tension on the strap. And then draw the leg back up to center. You can continue on this side a couple times, opening and closing, or just holding. I like to do more dynamic stretching, so I have a tendency to move in and out of the stretch. And then once you come back to parallel, internally rotate from the top of the leg. For this one, you're going to want to draw the opposite leg into extension on the floor. Switch the clasp of your hands on your strap. Right arm comes out into a T, and then you're going to draw the leg across midline. Once again, pelvic headlight shining straight up towards the sky. So part of your challenge is keeping the hip right here. Take a look. Keeping your hip down so it's not rolling over. And the idea is, in this position, you're getting more of a stretch through the side of the leg where the IT band is. If you would like to get more of a stretch to the TFL or outside of the hip, You can then roll afterwards. But I have another stretch for that I think is better. All right, so coming back up to center, we're gonna switch to the other side. We're gonna move through this a little bit faster on the other side now that you have a kind of a sense for what we're doing. Choose if your leg is gonna be long on the floor or bent leg. Also, if you have a back injury or tightness in your lower back or just really tight hamstrings, keeping this knee bent generally will help you stay in better alignment. All right, reach through the heel, curl the toes back towards the shins, and over the course of the next 3 to 4 breaths, you'll bend the knee on the inhale, exhale through extension, reaching the heel up towards the ceiling as you continue to keep toes curled back. And then on this next extension, we'll hold here from the top of the leg, externally rotate and internally rotate, externally rotate and internally rotate. As you do so, you're still reaching through the heel, keeping as much length through the entire leg as possible. And then bring the leg back to center. You're in parallel now. Your band or your strap will be in your left hand. Right arm goes out into a T. Spiral the head of the leg in the hip joint, externally rotating, and then draw the leg away from midline. Both shoulders stay rooted to the floor as you draw the leg open, and then come back to center. I like to exhale as I open the leg, hold for an inhale, exhale back. So I'm really using my abs to stabilize the pelvis and draw the leg back to center. One more here. And then internally rotating, switching with the clasp of my hand. Now the band is in my, or the strap is in my right hand. My left arm is out into a T position. I'm gonna lengthen my right leg so that I have room to draw the left leg across the body. Pelvis is staying square to the sky. And I'm trying to draw my shoulders down the back of the rib cage, keep the lower part of the rib cage rooted to the floor as I draw the leg across the body. Holding here for one more breath. This is one that I tend to hold, but I make little micro adjustments. So often as I hold this, I'm thinking about keeping my left hip down. Can I draw my leg a little bit closer towards the chest? Can I get it a little bit farther across midline? And then sometimes I realize that's as far as it's going, I'm done. All right, and then come back to center. We're gonna go into our next stretch. All right, so for our next stretch, we're going to start with drawing the pelvis about 5 inches or so to the left. Draw the left leg over the top of the right. Arms will go out into a T position. And then we're going to allow both knees to draw down to the right side of the body. I'm coming into a spinal twist. This is often known as lying twist. Let's get a view from that angle so that you can see the purpose of drawing the pelvis over to the left before doing the rotation. So the reason why I want to draw the pelvis over, and it's super important, is so that my right side of my hip is stacked underneath the left and my pelvis is in line with my rib cage. Both of my shoulders are rooted down to the mat, and then I might take my gaze opposite my knees. So watching from this perspective, you'll see as I go to the other side, I'm going to use my abs to draw my knees back up to center, uncross my legs. Notice how far over my pelvis is. I'm going to come back to pelvis in line with the spine, and then take my pelvis over about 5 or 6 inches. Right leg crosses over left, and I draw my knees down towards the floor, keeping both shoulders rooted to the mat. And I can always readjust. So if I feel like I'm not really quite on the outside of that bottom hip, I can just scoot myself over a little bit more to get a little deeper into the rotation. As you do this, think about drawing lower belly towards the spine to get more length through the side body and through the back of the lower back. This is going to give a nice stretch to side body, outside of the hip, and in this case, the right side of the lower back. And you can hold here for as long as it feels like you're getting deeper into the stretch. I'm also going to give you another option. So you're going to draw yourself back up to your starting position. You can go back to your same perspective again, but keep the same concept in mind. So this is a figure 4 stretch. You're going to cross your left ankle over the top of the right thigh. Make sure that your left foot is flexed so that you keep your knee in line with the second toe. You're externally rotating from the top of the left leg, trying to keep the pelvis square to the ceiling. For many people, especially if you've been running many years and you haven't done a lot of stretching, your hips are probably pretty tight. This is also true of cyclists and lots of other athletes. So what's more important here is that you're getting proper alignment and a good stretch where you want to stretch. This is going to stretch the piriformis, which is one of your hip rotators. It's certainly not the only hip rotator we're stretching here, but it's the one that people are often talking about. And it's often one that causes problems for folks. So that being said, feel free to stay here. If you want to add on, you have two different options. One, you can draw the top thigh up towards the chest, clasping at the back of the thigh to hold the leg in place. Notice that my pelvis totally rolled north here. So that's one way that the body likes to help us be successful. However, the more I draw my pelvis back to neutral, which is making me feel like I have really short arms right now, the more I draw it back to neutral, I feel more of a stretch to the outside of the left hip. So there's one option. I actually prefer to do this with my right foot up against a wall when that's available, so I can relax my upper body and I can maintain my pelvic alignment and just focus my energy there. My other stretch that I absolutely love, particularly after running, is taking this into rotation. So just like we did the lying twist, you're going to take your pelvis over about 5 or 6 inches, arms out into a T, and then you're going to draw yourself into this beautiful lumbopelvic twist. You might want to readjust like I need to right now in order to make sure that my hips are stacked. Again, both shoulders are resting on the floor. And in this case, on this side, I'm able to bring my sole of the foot to the floor. Don't feel like you have to. If you can't, you can always put a pillow underneath you, a yoga block, a book, anything you have available to help support you in this movement. And then on your next exhale, use your co-contraction, so you're lifting pelvic floor, drawing lower abs in, engaging spinal extensor muscles to draw yourself back to center. And you'll see I'm like way off kilter here, so before I do anything else, I want to realign so that my pelvis is aligned with my spine. And then cross your right ankle over the top of the left thigh. Foot is flexed on the right foot, and you're thinking about externally rotating from the top of the leg here. Pelvis is square to the ceiling, and I'm just going to let you know this is my really tight hip, so it's going to look different on this side. You might also have that challenge in your body too. All right, so feel free to stay here. Notice the difference. I'm going to pull my leg up, and I actually have to lift my head off the ground this time to get my hands behind the back of the thigh. All right? As I come back down, you're going to watch me basically pull my whole pelvis north. You guys see the difference here? I started here, and as I try to draw my thigh in, watch my pelvis move. And if I want to get my hands behind it, see how my neck's starting to do this? So this is a really good one to do for me against the wall, where I can just hold into place and adjust my body based upon the wall. I've got another video for that. All right, let's go into rotation. So we're going to take the pelvis about 5 or 6 inches to the right now, and I'm going to cross my legs over to the left side, and I'll continue to adjust so that I feel that my pelvis is in line with my rib cage, arms are out into a T. I've got to work to keep the shoulder down on the ground, and I'm feeling a lot of work right here in the hip, and my gaze is going opposite my knees. And if I wasn't on video, I'd probably hang out here for a few minutes just breathing into it. I'd probably put a block underneath my foot, because for me, and for a lot of people who have tight hips, really relaxing into this and letting go of this holding pattern takes some time. So be patient with yourself. For the sake of your time, we're going to move on to the last 2 exercises, or the last 2 stretches. For the sake of your time, we're going to move on to the last 2 stretches. So use your abs to come out of the stretch. Bring the pelvis back in line with the spine. Uncross the ankle. And then gently roll to one side. And we're going to come into a kneeling position. And if you have blocks, this is a great time to use them. If you don't have blocks, if you put 2 chairs on either side of you, they actually work better than blocks. But we're going to work with what we have right now. So we're going to go into kneeling lunge. First, you're going to place your front leg so that the knee is bent at 90 degrees in line with the ankle and the second toe. You'll notice from a side view that my knee is behind my pelvis. So let's take a side view, and you can see where I'm starting here. because that part's really important. So if I'm using my blocks, I have my hands on my blocks, my knees behind my pelvis, and the goal, again, just like when we're lying down on our back, stretching the hip flexors, specifically the psoas, I want to curl my pelvis north to get that scoop of the pelvis lengthening through the lower spine, opening through the front of the hip. Notice that if I send my pelvis back, I'm closing at the front of the hip. I'm not getting as much of a stretch. So that's why I want to curl the pelvis north, ground down through that front foot, and I'm also pressing into the back of the top of my foot. And then if I want to add on, I can reach my arms up overhead, shoulders draw down the back of the rib cage, and then again, I would hold this longer, but for the sake of the video, we're going to keep moving on. So that's stretching the hip flexors, front of the hip. Then we're going to move into a hamstring stretch. Reaching the heel forward, flexing the foot so toes are curled back towards the shins. When I do this, my pelvis is going to want to rotate. So it's really important to take that right sits bone, and it's actually down here, not up here. You're going to draw the sits bone back behind you to keep your pelvic headlight shining forward in front of you. So now, as I continue to draw the sits bones back behind me, I'm going to draw shoulders down the back of the rib cage, lengthen through the spine, and I might adjust my blocks so I can get a little bit lower here if it's available. If you're not using blocks, good for you, if you have that much flexibility. But also, you might need to come up onto your fingertips. I want to keep my spine as neutral as possible versus rounding my spine. So I see a lot of people get rid of the blocks and come down and they're looking like this. You want to really think about lengthening and keeping your head up and your gaze on the ground way in front of you will help you to keep your spine long versus rounded. Gently come out of this stretch. For many people, it's a very intense hamstring stretch. So notice I'm drawing my blocks up to the highest point so I can help use them to balance as I switch to the other side. And as we go to the other side, excuse my hair for being in the way, we're going to bend the knee of the front leg, make sure it's in line with the ankle and the second toe. Notice I'm already starting to curl my pelvis or rotate my pelvis out. I'm stretching the front of this hip flexor. In order to do so, my pelvis actually has to be facing forward in front of me as the knee is behind the pelvis, curling the pelvis north to get that stretch through the front of the hip. And then if I want to add on, I can reach arms up overhead. And again, I would stay here much longer if I was doing this as part of my own practice, and I would repeat a couple of times on each side, knowing that I get a little deeper into it each time I do it. And then I'm going to press forward with the heel of the front foot, curl the toes back towards the shin. Notice once again, my pelvis wants to rotate open, so I'm using the left sits bone, drawing it back behind me to keep my pelvic headlight shining down the path in front of me. Continuing to draw lower belly to spine to keep the lower spine nice and long. Shoulders draw down the back of the rib cage, and as I get deeper into the stretch here, I might come down a little bit lower. And once again, I felt my pelvis want to rotate open, so you're always checking in, really making sure that you're keeping the alignment that you want here. There's really never a time where we're just like chilling and resting. All right, and then gently come out of this stretch. And I know that this seemed like a lot to do after every single run. However, if you were doing this as a regular practice, you could get this done in about 10 and 15 minutes without having to go through everything that it takes to learn it the first time around. When you do these exercises, please make sure that you're focusing on your alignment. And if you have any questions about them, please reach out, let me know. I love helping people with this stuff. Good luck out there.